The Advanced Marksmanship Training Center was located in a remote section of the base that Sarah had never seen before. The buildings were newer, more specialized, and had an air of serious professionalism that was different from the basic training facilities. As Sarah and the other 5 selected candidates arrived at their new quarters, they were met by Master Sergeant Rebecca Torres, a woman whose reputation had preceded her throughout the entire base. Torres was a legend in precision shooting circles. She had served 3 combat deployments as a sniper, had more confirmed kills than any active female marksman in the military, and was known for her ability to train shooters who could perform under the most extreme conditions. She was also known for her uncompromising standards and her willingness to eliminate candidates who couldn't meet her expectations. "Welcome to the real military," Torres said as she addressed the new arrivals. "Everything you've done up to this point was just preparation for what we do here. In this program, you will learn to shoot accurately at distances up to 1,200 meters, in all weather conditions, day and night, under combat stress, and with equipment that will push the limits of what's physically possible." She paused to study each candidate individually, her gaze lingering on Sarah for a moment longer than the others. "You are here because you showed potential in basic marksmanship skills. But potential means nothing if you can't develop it into actual capability. Over the next 12 weeks, we will discover which of you has what it takes to be a precision marksman in the real world." The training began immediately, and Sarah quickly realized that everything she had learned previously was just the foundation for what she was now being taught. The new curriculum covered advanced ballistics calculations that required understanding of atmospheric pressure, humidity, temperature gradients, and Coriolis effects. They learned to use range-finding equipment, wind meters, ballistic computers, and night vision devices that were far more sophisticated than anything they had encountered before. Sarah threw herself into the academic aspects of the training with the same intensity she had always brought to learning. While some of the other candidates struggled with the mathematics and physics involved in long-range shooting, Sarah found that her natural aptitude for learning and her disciplined study habits gave her an advantage. She would often be found in the classroom after hours, working through ballistics problems or studying the technical manuals for the various pieces of equipment they were learning to use. Maria Santos, who had also been selected from Sarah's original group, became her closest ally in the program. Maria was from a military family and had grown up around weapons and tactics, giving her a practical knowledge that complemented Sarah's theoretical understanding. They began working together on study sessions and practice exercises, sharing knowledge and covering each other's weaknesses. "You know," Maria said one evening as they worked through a complex wind-reading exercise, "I've never seen anyone pick up the technical stuff as fast as you do. It's like you were born to understand how bullets fly." Sarah appreciated the compliment, but she also knew that understanding the theory was only part of what they needed to master. The practical application of that knowledge under real-world conditions was proving to be far more challenging than she had anticipated. The physical demands of the program were also more intense than anything Sarah had experienced. Advanced marksmen needed to be able to move quickly while carrying precision rifles and associated equipment that weighed significantly more than standard infantry weapons. They practiced moving through various types of terrain while maintaining the physical condition needed to shoot accurately after exertion. Sarah's small size continued to be both an advantage and a disadvantage. She could move more quietly and conceal herself more easily than larger candidates, but she struggled with some of the heavier equipment. The M24 sniper rifle system, with its scope, bipod, and associated gear, weighed nearly 20 pounds. Add that to a full combat load of ammunition, communications equipment, and survival gear, and Sarah was carrying almost half her body weight during field exercises. Master Sergeant Torres seemed to be particularly demanding of Sarah, pushing her harder than the other candidates, and setting higher standards for her performance. At first, Sarah wondered if Torres doubted her abilities or was trying to force her out of the program. It was only after several weeks that she began to understand that the extra attention was actually a sign of confidence rather than skepticism. "Chun," Torres said after a particularly challenging exercise in which Sarah had successfully engaged targets. The advanced marksmanship selection process began before dawn on a Monday morning that felt more like the dead of winter than early spring. Sarah arrived at the designated meeting point to find 12 other recruits already assembled, each one looking like they had stepped out of a military recruitment poster. She recognized a few faces from her basic training group, but most were from other companies, and all of them looked surprised to see her there. Staff Sergeant Williams, the instructor in charge of the program, was a lean man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He had the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself with volume or theatrics. When he spoke, people listened, not because they were afraid of him, but because they respected him. "Welcome to advanced marksmanship selection," he said simply. "Over the next 5 days, you will be tested on every aspect of precision shooting. Physical conditioning, mental toughness, technical knowledge, and actual shooting ability. Only half of you will be selected for the program. The rest will return to your regular training units." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She had expected competition, but the mathematics of it suddenly seemed overwhelming. 12 recruits competing for 6 spots, and she was clearly the least likely candidate based on physical appearance alone. The first test was a written examination covering ballistics, weapon systems, weather effects on long-range shooting, and tactical applications of precision marksmanship. Sarah had spent weeks studying these subjects, often late into the night while her bunkmates slept. As she worked through the complex calculations and technical questions, she felt confident for the first time since arriving at the base. When the results were posted that afternoon, Sarah's name was at the top of the list. She had scored a 98, higher than anyone else in the group. The recruit who had scored second, a serious-looking young man named David Park, approached her after they had all reviewed their scores. "How did you learn all that stuff?" he asked, not with hostility, but with genuine curiosity. Some of those ballistics calculations were college-level physics. Sarah shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I like to read," she said simply. David nodded thoughtfully. "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up." That was impressive. It was the first genuinely positive comment another recruit had made to her since arriving at the base, and Sarah found herself unexpectedly grateful for the simple acknowledgement of her abilities. The physical conditioning test the next day was brutal. The candidates had to complete a 12-mile march carrying full gear, followed immediately by an obstacle course that tested upper body strength, agility, and endurance. Sarah knew this would be her biggest challenge. While she had been building her stamina over the weeks of training, she was still significantly smaller and less naturally strong than most of the other candidates. During the march, Sarah fell behind the main group, but maintained a steady pace that got her to the finish line within the required time limit. Her shoulders ached from the weight of the pack, and her legs felt like rubber, but she had completed the task. The obstacle course was even more challenging, requiring her to climb ropes, traverse monkey bars, and navigate barriers that seemed designed for people much taller than she was. By the time she finished, 3 of the original 12 candidates had already been eliminated for failing to meet the minimum standards. Sarah had barely made the cut, but she was still in the running. That evening, as she soaked her sore muscles in the shower, she overheard 2 of the remaining candidates talking about her. "I don't know how she's still here," one of them said. "She could barely finish the march, and she looked like she was going to die on those monkey bars." "Yeah, but did you see her test score yesterday?" the other replied. Maybe there's more to this than just being able to carry heavy things. Sarah realized that her academic performance had bought her some credibility, even if her physical abilities were still questionable. She spent that evening stretching and doing light exercises, trying to prepare her body for whatever challenges the next day would bring. Day 3 brought the first real shooting test. The candidates were taken to a range unlike any Sarah had seen before. Instead of the standard 50-meter targets they had been using in basic training, this range stretched out to 600 meters, with targets at various distances and different types of terrain between the firing positions and the targets. Staff Sergeant Williams explained the exercise. Each candidate would fire at targets ranging from 200 to 600 meters, using different types of ammunition and accounting for various environmental conditions. Wind flags were positioned at regular intervals, and the candidates were expected to read the conditions and adjust their aim accordingly. Sarah watched as the first few candidates took their turns. Most of them could hit the closer targets consistently, but as the range increased, their accuracy decreased dramatically. The wind was tricky, shifting direction and intensity unpredictably, and the longer shots required calculations that went beyond basic marksmanship. When Sarah's turn came, she felt the familiar calm that descended on her whenever she held a rifle. She had been practicing the wind-reading techniques that Corporal Davis had taught her, and she had spent hours studying the ballistics tables for different types of ammunition. As she settled into her shooting position, she blocked out everything except the target, the wind, and the feel of the rifle in her hands. Her first shot at 200 meters hit dead center. The second, at 300 meters, was slightly off, but still well within the scoring ring. At 400 meters, she took her time, reading the wind flags and feeling the slight breeze on her face before taking the shot. Another hit in the center ring. The 500-meter target was where most of the other candidates had started to struggle seriously. Sarah knew that at this distance, every variable became magnified. A slight miscalculation in wind speed, a tiny flinch when pulling the trigger, or a small error in range estimation could send the bullet several inches off target. She studied the target through her scope, noting the way the heat waves were rising from the ground and how the wind flags were behaving at different distances. She made her calculations, adjusted her scope, controlled her breathing, and fired. The bullet struck the target just outside the center ring, a shot that would have been considered excellent by most standards. But Sarah knew she could do better. She took a moment to analyze what had gone wrong, realized she had slightly underestimated the wind speed, and mentally adjusted for the final shot. The 600-meter target looked impossibly small through the scope. Sarah could see Staff Sergeant Williams watching her intently, and she was aware that several of the other candidates had gathered to observe her performance. She pushed all of that out of her mind and focused solely on the shot. The bullet flight time at 600 meters was long enough that she could almost track the projectile's path through the scope. When it struck the target dead center, there was a moment of absolute silence before Staff Sergeant Williams announced the hit over the radio. "Perfect score for candidate Sean," he said, and Sarah could hear something that might have been approval in his voice. As she cleared her weapon and stood up from the firing position, she noticed that the other candidates were looking at her differently. The dismissive glances and skeptical expressions had been replaced by something that looked like respect, or at least recognition that she belonged there. David Park was the first to approach her. "That was incredible shooting," he said. "I've been hunting since I was 8 years old, and I don't think I could have made that last shot." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the physical exertion of the day. For the first time since arriving at the base, another recruit was acknowledging her skill without any qualification or backhanded compliment. The fourth day brought a new challenge: moving target engagements and shooting under stress. The candidates were required to engage targets while moving themselves, to shoot at targets that were moving across their field of view, and to maintain accuracy while under simulated combat conditions that included loud noises, smoke, and time pressure. This was where Sarah's small size actually became an advantage. While the larger candidates sometimes struggled to move quickly while carrying their weapons, Sarah found that her lighter weight allowed her to change positions rapidly without losing her shooting stability. Her naturally steady hands, which had always seemed like a minor trait, became a significant asset when trying to track moving targets. The stress shooting exercise involved engaging multiple targets while instructors set off simulated explosions and blew whistles designed to distract and disorient the shooters. Sarah found that her ability to focus, which had been honed by months of ignoring harassment and maintaining her composure under pressure, served her well in this environment. While other candidates were visibly affected by the chaos around them, Sarah seemed to exist in a bubble of concentration where only she and the targets mattered. By the end of the fourth day, only 7 candidates remained. 2 had been eliminated for poor shooting performance, and 1 had voluntarily withdrawn after struggling with the stress exercises. Sarah had not only survived, but had posted the highest overall scores in both the technical knowledge and practical shooting categories. That evening, Staff Sergeant Williams gathered the remaining candidates for what he called a reality check briefing. "Tomorrow is your final test," he told them. You will be given a scenario that simulates actual combat conditions. You will work in teams to neutralize targets at unknown distances while dealing with multiple variables including time pressure, equipment failures, and changing mission parameters. This is not just about shooting. This is about thinking, adapting, and performing under pressure. He paused and looked at each candidate individually. I want you to understand something. The advanced marksmanship program is not just about becoming a better shooter. We are training precision marksmen who will be called upon to make shots that can mean the difference between mission success and mission failure, between their teammates going home alive or not going home at all. If you are not prepared for that level of responsibility, now is the time to walk away. None of the candidates moved. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror at the prospect of that kind of responsibility, but she also felt, for the first time in her life, like she might have found something she was truly meant to do. The final day dawned cold and overcast, with a wind that seemed to shift direction every few minutes. The candidates were divided into two teams and given a complex scenario involving the neutralization of multiple targets in a simulated urban environment. The targets were positioned at ranges from 150 to 800 meters, hidden among buildings and obstacles that blocked clear lines of sight. Sarah found herself teamed with David Park and a quiet, intense recruit named Maria Santos who had consistently performed well throughout the selection process. Their team leader was a senior recruit named Thomas Mitchell who had impressed the instructors with his tactical knowledge and leadership abilities. The scenario began with the team being inserted into the training area via helicopter, already adding an element of realism and stress that none of them had experienced before. As they moved through the simulated urban environment, they had to identify targets, determine ranges, account for environmental conditions, and coordinate their movements to ensure they had clear fields of fire. Sarah found herself assigned to engage the longest-range targets, those beyond 500 meters that required the most precision and technical skill. As she moved into position for her first shot, she realized that everything she had learned over the past months was coming together. The technical knowledge from her studying, the physical conditioning from weeks of training, the mental toughness developed through constant harassment and pressure, and the shooting skills that seemed to come to her naturally. Her first target was a silhouette positioned 650 meters away, partially concealed behind a concrete barrier. Sarah had to calculate not only the range and wind conditions, but also the angle of the shot, since she was firing from an elevated position. She made her calculations, adjusted her scope, and took the shot. The target dropped immediately. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah engaged 7 targets at ranges from 400 to 800 meters. Every shot was a hit, and most were center mass impacts that would have immediately neutralized a real opponent. When the exercise concluded and the scores were tallied, her team had successfully completed the mission with the highest overall accuracy rating. More importantly, Sarah realized that she had found something she was genuinely gifted at. Not just shooting, but the entire complex process of precision marksmanship under pressure. Reading environmental conditions, making rapid calculations, maintaining focus under stress, and delivering accurate fire when it mattered most. When Staff Sergeant Williams announced the final selections that evening, Sarah's name was called first. She had not only been selected for the program, but had posted the highest overall scores in the selection process. As she stood to receive her new assignment orders, she saw something in the instructor's eyes that she had never seen directed at her before: genuine respect and professional recognition. David Park and Maria Santos were also selected, along with 3 other candidates who had performed consistently throughout the week. As they gathered their gear and prepared to move to their new training unit, David approached Sarah one more time. "I just wanted to say congratulations," he said. "And I wanted to apologize for doubting you at the beginning. I guess I learned something about not judging people by appearances." Sarah nodded, appreciating the honesty. "We all have things to learn," she replied. That night, as she packed her belongings for the move to the advanced training facility, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just 1 week. She was still the same small, quiet young woman who had been mocked and dismissed by her peers. But now she had proof that she possessed skills that mattered, abilities that could not be dismissed or explained away. More importantly, she had found a sense of purpose that had been missing from her life. The advanced marksmanship program would be even more challenging. But, for the first time since joining the military, Sarah felt like she was moving towards something rather than just trying to survive where she was. As she drifted off to sleep in the barracks for what would be her last night there, Sarah allowed herself to imagine a future where her skills would be valued, where her contributions would matter, and where the respect she had always craved might finally be within reach. She didn't know yet that the most important test of her abilities was still to come, or that the recognition she sought would come from someone whose opinion would change everything. Sarah Chin stepped off the military transport truck with her single duffel bag slung over her shoulder, immediately feeling the weight of dozens of stairs pressing down on her like a physical force. The Blackwater training facility stretched out before her in all its intimidating glory. Concrete buildings that looked more like bunkers, obstacle courses that seemed designed to break both body and spirit, and everywhere she looked, recruits who appeared to have been carved from granite. At 5 feet 4 inches and barely weighing 115 pounds, Sarah looked more like she belonged in a library than a military training facility. Her black hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her uniform hung loosely on her small frame despite the alterations. She had joined the military training program not out of some burning desire for combat, but because it was her only way out of a life that had offered her nothing but closed doors and empty promises. Growing up in a small town where opportunities were as rare as rain in the desert, Sarah had watched her classmates either leave for college on scholarships she couldn't afford or settle into jobs at the local factory that paid barely enough to survive. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 16, leaving her with an aunt who saw her more as a burden than family. The military offered her a chance at a different life, even if she wasn't entirely sure what that life would look like. The first person to approach her was Sergeant Martinez, a barrel-chested man with arms the size of tree trunks and a voice that could shatter glass. He looked down at Sarah with barely concealed disbelief, his eyes scanning her from head to toe as if he was trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. "You Chun," he barked, consulting his clipboard with a frown that suggested he was hoping there had been some kind of mistake. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, straightening her shoulders and trying to project more confidence than she felt. Martinez shook his head slowly, muttering something under his breath that Sarah was probably better off not hearing. "Well, Chun, welcome to hell. Try not to get yourself killed in the first week." As Martinez walked away, Sarah found herself surrounded by a group of male recruits who had been watching the exchange with obvious amusement. The tallest of them, a guy with the build of a linebacker and a face that suggested he had never met a problem he couldn't solve with his fists, stepped forward with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Well, what do we have here?" he said, his voice carrying just loud enough for the other recruits to hear. "Did someone's little sister get lost and end up at boot camp?" The laughter that followed felt like needles against Sarah's skin. She had expected this, had prepared herself for it, but the reality was still harder than she had imagined. She kept her expression neutral, knowing that any reaction would only make things worse. "I'm Jake Morrison," the big recruit continued, clearly enjoying himself. "And I'm betting you won't last 3 days here. This isn't a place for delicate flowers, sweetheart." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I guess we'll find out," she said quietly. More laughter erupted from the group, and Sarah could see other recruits starting to gather, drawn by the entertainment. She realized that this moment was going to define how the rest of her training went. She could back down, apologize, and spend the next several months being treated like a mascot, or she could stand her ground and deal with whatever consequences came from that choice. "Oh, she's got spirit," Jake said, nudging one of his buddies with his elbow. "That's cute. Spirit doesn't mean much when you're carrying a 60-pound pack through 20 miles of desert, but it's cute." The crowd around them had grown, and Sarah could feel the weight of their expectation. They wanted her to break, to cry, to prove that she didn't belong here. Instead, she simply nodded and picked up her duffel bag. "I appreciate the advice," she said calmly. "I'll keep it in mind." As she walked away toward the barracks, she could hear the comments following her like a trail of breadcrumbs. "She'll be gone by tomorrow. Someone should call her parents to come pick her up." This is what happens when they lower the standards. Sarah's bunk was in the corner of a large room filled with double-stacked beds that looked about as comfortable as sleeping on concrete. Her bunkmate turned out to be a woman named Lisa Rodriguez, a tough-looking girl from Detroit who had the kind of street-smart eyes that suggested she had seen more than her fair share of trouble. "Don't let them get to you," Lisa said quietly as Sarah unpacked her few belongings. "Half of them will wash out in the first month anyway. The loudest ones usually do." Sarah appreciated the kindness, but she could tell that even Lisa had her doubts. There was sympathy in her voice, but also a kind of resignation, as if she was already preparing herself to get a new bunkmate in a few days. That first night, Sarah lay in her narrow bunk staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of 20 other people trying to fall asleep in an unfamiliar place. Some were snoring, others were tossing and turning, and a few were quietly crying into their pillows. Sarah didn't cry, but she did wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. The next morning began at 4:30 with Sergeant Martinez's voice booming through the barracks like a foghorn. "Rise and shine, ladies and gentlemen. Time to separate the soldiers from the wannabes." The first week was a blur of physical training, classroom instruction, and constant evaluation. Every morning began with a 5-mile run that left Sarah gasping for breath, while some of the other recruits barely seemed winded. The obstacle courses were designed to test every muscle in the human body, and Sarah discovered muscles she didn't even know she had as they screamed in protest. During weapons training, Sarah found herself holding an M16 rifle that felt impossibly heavy in her small hands. The instructor, Corporal Davis, was a patient man who took time to show each recruit the proper stance, grip, and sight alignment. When he got to Sarah, she could see the doubt in his eyes, but he went through the motions anyway. "Marksmanship is about more than just strength," he explained to the group. "It's about breathing, focus, and consistency. The strongest person in the world won't hit anything if they can't control their breathing and steady their hands." Sarah listened intently, absorbing every word. When they moved to the practice range, she watched carefully as each recruit took their turn firing at targets 50 meters away. Most of them struggled to hit the target at all, their shots scattered wildly across the backstop. Jake Morrison, who had appointed himself as the informal leader of Sarah's tormentors, managed to hit the target several times, but couldn't seem to group his shots consistently. When Sarah's turn came, she could feel every eye on her. She stepped up to the firing line, adjusted her stance the way Corporal Davis had shown her, and raised the rifle to her shoulder. The weight that had seemed so overwhelming just minutes before suddenly felt manageable. She controlled her breathing, aligned the sights, and gently squeezed the trigger. The first shot hit the target, though not in the center. A small victory, but Sarah could hear the surprise and the murmurs behind her. She fired 4 more rounds, each one landing closer to the bullseye than the last. When she lowered the rifle, Corporal Davis was studying the target through binoculars with a thoughtful expression. "Not bad, Chun," he said simply, but there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Jake Morrison, however, was not impressed. "Lucky shots," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Let's see her do that when someone's shooting back." The harassment continued relentlessly throughout the first weeks of training. Sarah's gear would mysteriously disappear, only to be found in inappropriate places. Her bunk would be short-sheeted or filled with dirt. During group exercises, she would find herself partnered with people who seemed more interested in making her fail than in completing the mission. Through it all, Sarah said nothing. She cleaned up the messes, found her missing gear, and completed every task that was assigned to her. She learned to sleep with one eye open and to double-check everything before depending on it. Most importantly, she learned to rely on herself completely because it became clear that no one else was going to help her. The only place where she found any peace was on the shooting range. Every time they had weapons training, Sarah felt something inside her relax. The rifle in her hands stopped feeling like a burden and started feeling like an extension of herself. While other recruits struggled with the mechanics of marksmanship, Sarah seemed to have an intuitive understanding of how to make the weapon do what she wanted. Corporal Davis began to notice. He would spend extra time with her, teaching her advanced techniques that weren't part of the standard curriculum. He showed her how to read wind conditions, how to adjust for different types of ammunition, and how to maintain her focus even when everything around her was chaos. "You've got something special," Chun, he told her one afternoon after she had put 5 rounds through the same hole at 200 meters. I've been training shooters for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone pick this up as fast as you have. Sarah appreciated the encouragement, but she knew that being good at shooting wasn't enough to earn respect from her fellow recruits. If anything, her growing skill on the range seemed to make them more hostile. Jake Morrison had started a campaign to convince everyone that the instructors were going easy on her, that her targets were closer than everyone else's, or that she was getting special ammunition. She's probably never even seen a real gun before she got here, he would say loudly during meals. Must be all those video games, right, princess? Sarah learned to eat quickly and leave the dining hall before the comments got too creative. She spent her free time in the library, studying military history and tactics, or on the running track, trying to build up the endurance that came naturally to some of her fellow recruits. One evening, about 6 weeks into training, Sarah was returning from a late-night study session when she heard voices coming from behind the equipment shed. She recognized Jake Morrison's laugh and was about to change direction to avoid another confrontation when she heard her name mentioned. I'm telling you, we need to do something about Chun, Jake was saying. She's making us all look bad with that shooting stuff. The instructors are starting to think she's actually soldier material. What do you want to do? Asked another voice that Sarah recognized as belonging to Mike Torres, one of Jake's closest followers. I'm thinking we arrange for her to have an accident during tomorrow's live fire exercise, Jake replied casually, as if he was discussing the weather. Nothing too serious, just enough to get her sent home where she belongs. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. She knew Jake didn't like her, but she hadn't realized how far he was willing to go. She crept closer to the shed, trying to hear more details, but her foot hit a loose piece of gravel that skittered across the concrete. The conversation stopped immediately, and Sarah heard footsteps moving in her direction. She ran, her heart pounding, knowing that if they caught her listening, things would only get worse. She made it back to the barracks without being seen, but she spent the night staring at the ceiling, wondering what she was going to do. The next morning's live fire exercise was more intense than any they had done before. The recruits were divided into teams and given a scenario that required them to advance through a series of positions while engaging targets at various ranges. Sarah found herself assigned to a team with Jake Morrison and 3 of his friends, an arrangement that seemed unlikely to be coincidental. As they moved through the course, Sarah kept waiting for something to go wrong. Every time Jake was behind her, she felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. During one particularly intense sequence, when they were advancing under simulated enemy fire, she heard Jake shout a warning about incoming artillery. Everyone dove for cover, but Sarah noticed that Jake's eyes were on her rather than on any potential threat. She threw herself behind a concrete barrier just as a training grenade exploded in the area where she had been standing. It was a simulation round, designed to create noise and smoke without causing injury, but if someone had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, it could still cause serious harm. When the exercise ended, Sergeant Martinez gathered the group for a debriefing. He seemed unusually serious, and Sarah noticed that he kept looking in her direction. Some of you performed well today, he said finally. Others showed that you still have a lot to learn about working as a team and watching out for your fellow soldiers. His eyes settled on Jake Morrison as he said this, and Sarah realized that the sergeant had seen more than she had thought. For the first time since arriving at the facility, she felt like maybe, just maybe, someone in authority was paying attention to what was really going on. After the debriefing, Corporal Davis approached her privately. Chun, I want to talk to you about something. There's an advanced marksmanship program that's invitation only. The selection process is next week, and I think you should try out. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and fear. An advanced program would mean more intensive training, but it would also mean being even more separated from the other recruits. She was already isolated enough as it was. I don't know if that's a good idea, sir, she said carefully. I'm still trying to fit in with my regular unit. Corporal Davis studied her for a moment, and she had the feeling that he understood more about her situation than she had realized. Chun, sometimes fitting in isn't the goal. Sometimes the goal is finding where you actually belong. Think about it. As Sarah walked back to the barracks that evening, she realized that she had reached a crossroads. She could continue trying to blend in, to minimize the harassment, to just survive until graduation. Or she could take a chance on something that might lead to even more isolation, but could also lead to something greater. That night, as she lay in her bunk listening to the familiar sounds of the barracks settling into sleep, Sarah made her decision. She was tired of trying to make herself smaller to fit into other people's expectations. If she was going to be mocked and isolated anyway, she might as well be mocked and isolated for being exceptional rather than for being weak. The next morning, she found Corporal Davis and told him she wanted to try out for the advanced program. The smile that spread across his face told her that she had made the right choice. Even if she had no idea what challenges lay ahead, in a world where strength is measured by muscle and respect is earned through fear, one young woman discovered that the deadliest weapon isn't always the loudest one. Sarah Chun had been laughed at, dismissed, and written off by every person who crossed her path. They saw her small frame, quiet demeanor, and gentle smile, and immediately decided she didn't belong. What they couldn't see was the storm brewing behind her calm eyes. A precision so deadly, a focus so intense, that it would soon silence every doubter and earn the respect of the most feared military commander in the region. This is the story of how the girl everyone mocked became the sniper everyone feared, and how one moment of recognition changed everything. It's about finding strength in unexpected places, proving that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones you never see coming, and discovering that true power doesn't announce itself with noise. It whispers with deadly accuracy. The journey from mockery to mastery isn't just about learning to shoot. It's about learning to survive, to stand tall when the world tries to knock you down, and to find your voice when everyone else tries to silence it. Sarah's story will take you from the dusty training grounds where dreams are either made or shattered, to the moment when everything she endured finally made sense, when the very people who had dismissed her were forced to witness the lethal precision they had created through their cruelty.